The morning sunlight crept slowly across the horizon, soft and golden, painting the land in gentle colors. A quiet breeze brushed against the grass, carrying the sweet smell of the fields. It was the kind of morning that felt calm and full, like the world itself was taking a long, slow breath. Luke opened his eyes to the sound of birds singing somewhere near the porch. For a second, he didn't move. He just lay there, listening to the world wake up. It wasn't the usual stillness that greeted him. It felt warmer somehow, softer, as if something good had passed through the night and left its mark behind. Emily sat a few feet away, wrapped in the blanket he had given her. The light touched her hair gently, turning it gold at the edges. She wasn't looking at him. She was watching the sunrise, her knees pulled close, quiet and peaceful. Luke watched her for a moment without saying anything. He wanted to memorize everything. The way her hair moved slightly in the breeze. The way the morning light made her eyes shine. The way her presence filled the silence without needing words. He wasn't used to this feeling. He'd spent so many years alone, his life moving at the same slow rhythm. But now that she was here, even the quiet seemed different. He didn't know what would happen next. But in that moment, he wasn't thinking about tomorrow. He was just there. And she was too. Emily turned and caught him looking at her. She smiled softly, a small smile that said everything words didn't have to. "Good morning," she whispered. "Morning," Luke said, his voice still low from sleep. They sat there for a while, watching the sky change color, soft orange melting into pale blue. The world felt new, even though nothing around them had changed. Luke wanted to say something honest and big, but no word seemed right. So he said nothing. And strangely, silence was enough. Emily leaned back slightly, breathing in the fresh air. "I've seen a lot of mornings in a lot of places," she said softly. "But this one feels different." Luke looked out at the land. "Maybe it's just quieter here." She shook her head gently. "No, it's not just the quiet. It's the feeling, like the world is slow enough to notice things that usually pass too fast." He understood. This land had been slow his whole life, but he had never really felt it this way, not until she came. After a few minutes, she pulled the blanket tighter around her and let out a quiet sigh. It wasn't a heavy sigh, but it carried something soft and sad. "I have to leave today," she said. The words settled in the air like a stone falling into still water. Luke had known it, but hearing it out loud made it real. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the land stretching out in front of them, the same land he had loved his whole life. And for the first time, it didn't feel enough. "When?" he finally asked. "In a few hours," she said softly. "The bus leaves at noon." He nodded slowly. He had no right to ask her to stay. He knew that. She belonged to the road, to stories waiting to be found. He belonged to the ranch, to the silence. They were two people from different worlds who had somehow met in the quiet middle. But knowing something and accepting it are two different things. Emily looked at him carefully. "You're quiet," he gave a small smile. "I usually am, but it's a different quiet," she said gently. He didn't argue. She was right. She turned back to the sunrise. "You know, when I first came here, I didn't plan to stay this long. Just a few interviews, some photos, then move on, but something happened." Luke's heart beat a little faster. "What happened?" She looked at him, her eyes warm and steady. "You." It was just one word. Simple, honest. But it hit him deep, like a soft wind that finds a hidden door and opens it. "I don't know why," she continued, her voice quiet but sure. "But being here, being with you, it felt different from anywhere else I've been. Like I wasn't just passing through. Like I belonged here, and even for a little while." Luke didn't know what to say. He had never been someone's reason for anything before, but hearing her say those words made something inside him ache in a way that was both beautiful and painful. "You don't have to explain," he said finally. She smiled gently. "I know." After breakfast, they rode Rusty out to the edge of the ranch. The morning air was cool and the grass whispered softly as they moved. Emily sat behind Luke, holding onto the back of the saddle, her laughter floating through the air every time the horse shifted. It wasn't loud laughter. It was soft and real, like sunlight on water. Luke showed her the old oak tree that had been standing since before he was born, the small pond where he used to sit as a boy, and the quiet stretch of land. where the stars shone brightest at night. Every step of the ride felt like a memory being built, something both of them would carry long after she was gone. They stopped near the pond. The water was still and clear, reflecting the blue sky. Emily slid off the horse and walked toward the edge, kneeling down to touch the cool water with her fingertips. "This place is beautiful," she whispered. Luke didn't answer. He was watching her, the way her reflection moved gently in the water, the way she seemed to belong to this moment even if she didn't belong to this place. She turned to look at him. "I don't want to forget this." "You won't," he said softly. She smiled a little sadly. "But everything fades when you keep moving. That's the hard part about traveling. You see so much, but you also leave so much behind." Luke walked closer, standing beside her. "Then don't forget it. Even if everything else fades," she nodded slowly. "I'll try." Time moved quietly around them, like the world was giving them a little extra before it had to take it away. But every second felt sharper, clearer, because they both knew it wouldn't last. By late morning, they returned to the ranch. Her bag was waiting by the porch, small, worn, and ready to keep moving just like her. The sight of it made Luke's chest tighten. She stood there looking at him as if memorizing his face, the porch, the wide open sky behind him. "I hate goodbyes," she said softly. "Me too," he replied. For a moment, neither of them moved. The wind brushed against the porch steps. Somewhere far off, a horse neighed. The world seemed to hold its breath. Emily stepped closer, close enough that he could see the sunlight in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting me in, even just for a little while." He wanted to say something like stay or don't go, but he knew it wasn't fair to ask. So instead, he said the only words that felt true. "You'll always have a place here." Her eyes softened. "And you'll always have a story with me." The sound of the bus arriving in town reached them faintly, a reminder that the world outside their quiet moment was still moving forward. She picked up her bag. Luke walked her down the dirt road toward the small bus stop near the edge of town. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Every step carried more than words could hold. When the bus finally came into view, Emily turned to him one last time. The smile she gave him wasn't the bright, curious one he'd seen before. It was smaller but deeper, the kind of smile you give to someone who has touched your heart. "I'll write about this place," she said softly. "But more than that, I'll remember it." He nodded, his hands in his pockets, his heart steady but heavy. "Safe travels." She hesitated for just a second, like the world had slowed down just for her. Then she whispered, "Goodbye, cowboy." "Goodbye, traveler," he replied. She stepped onto the bus. Luke watched as it started down the road, slowly growing smaller until it disappeared around the bend. The dust settled behind it. The world grew quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before she came. This quiet held something new, something that would stay with him even if she didn't. He walked back to the ranch slowly, the sun warm on his shoulders, the breeze soft against his face. Rusty lifted his head when Luke returned, as if asking where she was. Luke just gave a small smile and patted the horse's neck. Life would go on. The ranch would keep breathing in its slow rhythm. The stars would shine at night, but something inside Luke had changed. She had left, but she hadn't really gone. She was in the quiet of the porch, in the smell of the wind, in the way the sunrise looked a little softer than before. Sometimes people don't stay forever. Sometimes they only walk beside you for a short while, but even in that short time, they can leave behind something that never truly fades. Luke leaned against the fence as the sun began to set again, the sky glowing gold and pink. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he could still hear her voice, soft as the wind. And in that quiet, Luke smiled, because even though she was gone, she had given him something he didn't even know he had been missing, a heartbeat in his silence. The night before the last day of the rodeo was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty but full of everything left unsaid. Luke sat on the porch of his ranch, his hat on his knee, staring out at the dark sky stretched wide like a blanket of soft velvet. The stars shone bright and the moonlight painted the land in a gentle silver glow. He had been thinking of Emily all day. Her laugh, her smile, the way she looked at everything with wide, curious eyes, like the world was full of wonder, and she wanted to hold it all. She had a way of making things feel alive, even things Luke had seen 1,000 times before. But now she was also the reason his chest felt heavy in a way he couldn't explain. He leaned back on the old wooden chair, the wood creaking softly beneath him. Rusty was resting in the stable. The night smelled like warm earth and distant grass. Everything around him was the same as it always had been. But he wasn't the same. Something had shifted inside him, quiet, deep, real. He didn't know if it was love. That word felt too big, too sudden. But he knew this. Her presence had become part of his days without him even realizing it. And the thought of her leaving made the air feel colder than the night breeze. The rodeo would end tomorrow. And after that, she would move on to another town, another story, just like she always did. That thought sat in his chest like a small stone that grew heavier with every hour. The next morning, Luke woke up early. The sun was soft and golden, spreading light over the open fields. He tried to go through his chores the way he always did, feeding Rusty, checking the fences, making sure everything was in place. But he wasn't fully there. His hands worked, but his mind wandered to the rodeo ground, to her. He told himself not to expect anything. She was a traveler. He was a man rooted to the soil. Their worlds didn't meet in the middle. But even so, something inside him wanted one more day, one more memory to hold on to when she was gone. When he reached the rodeo grounds that afternoon, the energy was different, bigger. The final day always brought more people, more laughter, more noise. Children ran around with candy. Music played from every corner and the air smelled like popcorn and fresh hay. Horses moved nervously in their stalls, feeling the excitement too. And there she was. Emily stood near the gate, camera in hand, sunlight brushing against her hair like a soft halo. She looked happy, like she belonged there, even if just for a little while. When her eyes found him, she smiled the same warm smile she had given him on the first night, the one that had quietly found a place in his heart. "Morning. Cowboy," she said as he walked up. "Morning," he replied, his voice calm, though inside it felt anything but calm. She looked around at the busy rodeo ground. "Can you believe it's the last day?" He nodded slowly. "It goes by fast," she sighed, a soft sound that carried more weight than she let show. "Yeah, it always does." They walked together along the edge of the arena. She asked him about the events, about the horses, about the riders. But beneath the easy conversation, something heavier hung in the air. Both of them felt it. Both of them avoided saying it. As the sun climbed higher, the rodeo came alive with full force. Riders burst into the arena, boots hitting the dirt, ropes flying, and the crowd cheering loud enough to shake the stands. Emily lifted her camera, capturing every moment with quiet focus. Luke stood next to her, not watching the riders as much as he watched her. The way her eyes sparkled with every shot. The way she leaned forward when the crowd cheered. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like just an observer. He felt alive. Hours passed like minutes. The sun began to set, painting the sky in orange and gold. As the final event ended, the crowd slowly began to drift away. The music softened, the dust settled, and a calm quiet returned to the ground. Luke found himself standing near the fence again. Emily was beside him, her camera now hanging loosely around her neck. She wasn't smiling now. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He looked at her instead of the sunset. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." For a few long seconds, neither of them spoke. The golden light wrapped around them like a soft blanket. The air felt thick with all the words they hadn't said. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "I'm leaving tomorrow." Luke had known it, but hearing the words out loud was different. It was like a door closing softly, even before he'd had the chance to knock. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting slightly with the strap of her camera. "I've been here longer than I planned. I usually don't stay this long." He didn't ask why. He was afraid to hear the answer. She lifted her head, her eyes finding his. "You make it hard to leave, Luke." The world seemed to go still for a heartbeat. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't the kind of man who knew the right words in moments like this. All he could do was stand there, heart pounding, trying to breathe through the sudden rush of feeling. He took a slow breath. "Then don't." The words surprised even him. They were soft, almost like a whisper, but they came from somewhere real, a place deep inside him that didn't speak often. Emily's eyes widened slightly, not in shock, but in something gentler. She smiled. Not the wide smile she showed the world, but a small, fragile one meant only for him. "You know I can't." He nodded because he did know. She had a life that didn't fit inside fences, and he had a life built on them. But standing there under the golden sky, the space between them felt smaller than ever before. She stepped a little closer, just enough for him to hear her voice like a soft breeze. "This place changed something in me, Luke. You changed something in me." He looked down at her, at the way the wind moved her hair, at the way her eyes held something honest, something warm. For so long Luke had lived in silence. He had watched the world from a safe distance. But now that distance was gone. She had quietly crossed it without asking for permission, and he had let her. The stars began to appear slowly in the fading light. People had mostly gone home. The rodeo ground was quiet now, except for the sound of the wind. It was just the two of them, standing side by side, holding on to a moment that neither of them wanted to end. Emily hugged her arms around herself and looked up at the stars. "Do you ever just wish you could stop time?" "All the time," Luke said softly. She turned to him then, her face calm but her eyes full of something deep, something unspoken. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. She took a small breath. "Can I sleep beside you tonight?" The question hung in the air like a spark in the dark. Luke froze for a second, not because he didn't understand, but because of what it meant. Her voice wasn't bold in a careless way, and it was honest, gentle. There was no rush, no demand. It was trust, pure and simple. For years, Luke had built a wall between himself and the world. But in that single moment, standing under the stars with her, he felt that wall crumble. Not with noise, but with quiet certainty. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just a traveler, not just a story seeker, but someone who saw him. The quiet, the simple, the real. After what felt like a long silence, he said softly, "If you trust me enough to ask, then I trust myself enough to say yes." Emily didn't say anything. She just smiled. A soft, grateful smile that said everything words couldn't. They walked together through the quiet night toward the ranch. The world around them felt still, as if the stars themselves were listening. The sound of their boots against the dirt was the only thing that broke the silence. It wasn't awkward. It was gentle. When they reached the porch, Luke handed her a blanket. They sat outside together, wrapped in the soft night air. Not touching, just sitting close enough to feel each other's warmth. Above them, the sky stretched wide, full of endless stars. Emily rested her head gently on the back of the chair, her eyes closed for a moment. "This," she whispered, "is peace." Luke didn't reply. He didn't need to. Peace was exactly what it was. Not loud, not wild, just quiet. The kind of quiet that felt alive. For hours they sat like that. No big speeches, no promises, no loud declarations. Just silence, trust, and the night holding them gently. It was simple. And it was perfect. Luke had lived so long behind his own walls, thinking that silence was all he needed. But now, sharing that silence with someone else, he realized something he hadn't understood before. Real connection isn't about noise. It's about being still together. As the night grew deeper, the stars looked brighter. Luke turned his head slightly and saw Emily's eyes closed, a soft smile on her lips. She wasn't just a traveler anymore. Not to him. And even though he knew she would leave in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was now, and now was beautiful. The rodeo grounds were busier than ever. Music floated through the warm air, boots crunched against the dusty ground, and horses snorted impatiently in their pens. Colorful banners moved gently in the breeze. It was the day everyone in town waited for each year, the first big night of the rodeo. Luke had seen this sight so many times before, but today felt different. The noise, the crowd, the movement, it all seemed louder somehow, sharper. Maybe it wasn't the rodeo that had changed. Maybe it was him. As he walked through the grounds, he couldn't stop thinking about Emily. Every corner reminded him of something from the day before, her questions, her laughter, her way of looking at the world like it was made of stories waiting to be found. But deep down, another feeling was slowly growing, one he didn't like. It was a quiet fear, the kind that doesn't make noise but still fills the chest like a heavy weight. Luke had spent years building a life that didn't let anyone too close. People came and went from the rodeo all the time. Outsiders never stayed. He had learned that lesson long ago. Emily wasn't like the others, and that made everything more complicated. He worked through the day like he always did, feeding horses, helping set up gates, carrying ropes, nodding at people who called his name. On the outside, he looked the same. On the inside, he was tangled. He liked talking to her. He liked the way she made the world feel bigger than just the ranch. But a voice in his head kept whispering, "She'll leave, just like everyone else." That evening, as the sun began to sink low, the crowd gathered for the first event. Lights glowed around the arena. The announcer's voice rolled through the speakers, loud and excited. Horses kicked up dust as they waited. Families filled the stands with popcorn and bright smiles. Luke leaned against the fence, hat tilted down, watching quietly. He had once ridden in these events. He remembered the rush of stepping into the arena, the crowd cheering like thunder, the world shrinking down to one moment between him and the horse. It had been years since then. He told himself he was fine with watching from the outside, but some part of him still felt the echo of that old fire. "Cowboy Luke," a familiar voice called. He turned, and there she was. Emily. She wore a light jacket and a soft smile, the kind that made her look like she'd always belonged there. Her camera hung around her neck, ready to capture the night. But her eyes weren't focused on the rodeo yet. They were on him. "You look like someone who knows every secret this place has," she said softly. Standing next to him, Luke's lips curved into a small smile before he could stop it. "I've just been around long enough to know the stories." "Then tell me one," she said, tilting her head slightly. He hesitated. He wasn't good at talking about himself. He usually kept his stories locked away like old tools in a shed, but something about the way she asked made him want to open the door a little. He told her about the first time he rode in the arena when he was 17. How his hands shook, how his heart raced, and how for the first time in his life he felt like the world was holding its breath just for him. Emily listened without interrupting, her eyes bright, like his words were painting pictures in the air. When he finished, she whispered, "I wish I could have seen that." Her voice was quiet, but the way she said it made Luke's heart beat a little faster. No one had ever said something like that to him before, not like it mattered. The crowd cheered as the first rider entered the arena. Dust rose in golden clouds under the lights. Luke and Emily stood side by side, watching together. For a long moment, he forgot about everything else, the fear, the walls, the weight. It was just the two of them and the rhythm of the rodeo around them. But as the night went on, Luke began to notice things he hadn't before. The way people in the crowd looked at her with curiosity, how she talked to everyone, gathering stories for her article, how easily she fit in and yet how easily she would leave once her work was done. She belonged to movement. He belonged to stillness. That truth pressed against his heart like a quiet ache. Later, when the rodeo events ended for the night, the crowd spilled out toward the food stalls. Lanterns lit up the dirt paths. Music played softly in the background. Emily walked beside Luke, holding a small paper cup of hot cocoa, her camera still hanging around her neck. "This place," she said, looking around, "has a heartbeat." Luke glanced at her. "A heartbeat?" She nodded, smiling. "Yeah, some places are just land and buildings, but this has a heartbeat. You can feel it." He wanted to say something honest. Something like, "You're the first person who's ever said that." But the words got stuck in his throat, so he just nodded. They found a quiet spot near the edge of the fairgrounds, away from the lights. The night sky above was clear and deep, sprinkled with stars. Emily leaned on the wooden fence, breathing in the cool air. "I've been on the road for months," she said quietly. "I've seen so many places, but I never stay. I always move on." Luke felt his chest tighten. He didn't want to ask the next question, but the words came anyway. "Why?" She took a sip of her drink, her eyes distant. "Because I'm scared that if I stop, I'll lose something. I don't even know what exactly. Maybe it's freedom. Maybe it's myself." Luke looked down at the ground. He understood that feeling more than she could know. He had done the opposite, stayed too long in one place because he was afraid of losing it. They were two people carrying different kinds of fear. Emily turned to him again, her eyes soft. "What about you? Why did you stay?" He didn't answer right away. He thought about the ranch, his father's hands, the quiet mornings, the horses waiting for him. "Because leaving felt like breaking something I promised," he said finally. "And I didn't know how to live without it." For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the crickets and distant laughter from the fair. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that felt heavy and honest, like two hearts recognizing each other without needing big words. But beneath that quiet moment, something else was growing inside Luke, a storm of emotions he couldn't control. He wanted to let her in, but a part of him also wanted to run away before it hurt. He had lived alone for so long that the thought of caring for someone scared him. She was temporary. He knew that. People like Emily didn't stay in small towns. They left with stories and never looked back. And yet, he was already beginning to hope for something he shouldn't hope for. When Emily said goodnight and walked back toward the motel, Luke stayed behind, standing near the fence. The wind brushed against his face, carrying the smell of the fair. His heart was quiet but restless. He didn't like this feeling, wanting someone who would one day leave. He looked at the stars above, the same stars he'd seen every night for years. But tonight they didn't feel the same. He rode Rusty home slowly. The night air was cool, and the sky stretched wide. He could still hear her voice in his mind, unsoft, curious, real. He remembered the way she looked when she said, "I never stay." Those words lingered like a small thorn in his chest. When he reached the ranch, he leaned against the fence and stared out at the open land. The quiet he had always loved didn't feel peaceful tonight. It felt empty, and that scared him even more than the noise ever could. He told himself not to get too close. He told himself to keep his distance. But the truth was already written somewhere inside him. He was already caught in something he didn't fully understand. He didn't know how long she would stay. He didn't know if she felt the same spark he did. But he knew one thing. She had already changed something deep inside him. And no matter what happened next, his quiet life would never be the same again. The next morning came quietly, the way most mornings did on the ranch. A cool breeze moved through the fields, carrying the fresh smell of grass. Luke woke up before the sun as usual. The world was still blue and soft, like a painting not yet finished. He poured black coffee into an old mug, stepped onto the porch, and watched the light slowly spread across the land. It should have felt like every other day. Calm, quiet, the same steps repeated like an old song. But it didn't. Something in the air felt different, lighter somehow. It wasn't just the breeze. It was something inside him, a small, warm flicker he hadn't felt in years. He didn't have to wonder long to know why. Emily. Her smile. Her voice. The way she looked at the stars as if they were old friends. It had all stayed with him through the night. Luke wasn't someone who thought much about strangers after meeting them. But she wasn't like anyone he had met before. She didn't talk too loud. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She simply was. And for some reason, that quiet presence had found its way into his steady, guarded world. He tried to shake it off and focus on work. He saddled Rusty, brushed the dust from the saddle, and began the day's chores, fixing the fence line, checking the water trough, making sure the cattle hadn't wandered too far overnight. His hands moved like they always did, strong and steady. But his mind kept wandering back to the campfire. He remembered how she had walked up to him without hesitation. How she'd said, "I like quiet people." He remembered how, for the first time in a long time, he hadn't minded someone sitting close to him. It was strange. He had learned to live alone so well that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to let someone in, even for a short moment. Later that day, Luke rode Rusty toward the rodeo grounds. It was a tradition for him. Even when he wasn't competing, he liked to watch the early setup. The place was already waking up with noise and color. Flags were going up. Horses were being brushed down. Kids were running around with excitement written all over their faces. The rodeo brought a special kind of life to town, the kind that even quiet men like Luke couldn't fully ignore. And then, he saw her. Emily was standing near the fence, holding her camera, squinting slightly at the sunlight. She wore the same denim jacket from the night before, and her hair danced lightly in the breeze. She wasn't looking for anyone in particular. She was looking at everything. At the horses, the cowboys preparing, the painted signs, the boots, the laughter. She was absorbing the world around her like she wanted to keep it forever. Luke almost turned away. He wasn't good at small talk. He didn't know how to walk up to someone and just start something. But before he could decide, she looked up and saw him. Her smile was easy and familiar, like they'd known each other longer than just one night. She raised her hand in a little wave. For some reason, Luke's heart beat a little faster. He lifted his hand back almost shyly but didn't walk over. She, however, had no trouble doing so. She walked toward him, the camera hanging against her chest, boots tapping softly on the dirt. "Morning, Cowboy," she said lightly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Morning," Luke answered, his voice quiet but warm. She leaned slightly on the fence next to him. "You work here?" He nodded. "Just down that way. Family ranch." Her eyes lit up, curious. "That sounds like a story." Luke gave a small smile, the kind he didn't even realize he was giving. "Not much to tell. Been here all my life." "I think that's exactly why it is a story," she said softly. "People like me run from place to place trying to find something that feels real. And then there are people like you and living inside it every day." Her words caught him off guard. No one had ever said something like that to him before. Most outsiders thought the town was too small, too simple, too quiet. But she spoke like it mattered. Like he mattered. She looked out at the rodeo ground again and lifted her camera. "Can I take a picture of you?" Luke frowned a little, confused. "Why me?" "Because when people read about this place," she said gently, "they should see the people who make it what it is. And something tells me you're part of the heart of it." He didn't know how to answer. He wasn't used to attention, especially from someone like her. But after a moment he nodded. She lifted her camera carefully as if handling something fragile. The click of the shutter was soft but felt louder in his chest. She didn't make him pose or smile big. She just captured him as he was. Hat tilted low, quiet eyes, hands resting on the fence. When she lowered the camera, she didn't say anything. She just looked at him for a second, like she was seeing more than what the picture showed. Then she smiled again. "You look like a man who carries a lot of quiet in his heart," she said. Luke didn't know if it was meant as a compliment, but somehow it felt like one. They spent the next hour walking around the grounds together. She asked him questions about rodeo events, how the riders trained, what the horses were like, why the dust always smelled different after a long day. She wasn't asking like a reporter. She was asking like someone who wanted to know, and Luke found himself answering, slowly at first, then a little more easily. He pointed to the arena, told her how he used to ride when he was younger, how the crowd cheered louder than thunder, and how it felt to stand there with your boots covered in dust, heart pounding from the ride. He didn't usually talk this much, but something about her made it feel simple. At one point, she laughed at something he said. Not a loud laugh, but one that came from deep inside. It made Luke want to say more just to hear it again. He didn't say that out loud, of course. But the feeling stayed with him. As the day stretched on, the sun climbed higher. The wind grew warmer, carrying the sounds of the town. Vendors were setting up food stalls. Children's voices mixed with the sound of horses snorting and ropes snapping. And through all the noise, Luke felt a strange kind of calm walking beside Emily. There was something special about being with someone who didn't try to change the silence, and she simply walked inside it with him. As they reached the far end of the rodeo ground, Emily stopped and leaned against the fence again. She looked around with a soft expression. "This place," she whispered, "feels different than anywhere I've been. It's quiet but alive." Luke looked at the same view she did. "I guess you just get used to it." She turned her head toward him, a small playful smile on her lips. "Maybe some people do. But some people belong to it." Her words sank deep into him like soft rain soaking dry earth. He wasn't sure why her voice had that effect. Maybe because no one had ever looked at his quiet life like it was something beautiful. Most people saw it as simple or small. But she spoke like it was something worth remembering. They didn't rush back. They just stayed there for a while, watching the horses run in circles, listening to the sounds of the wind and the rodeo starting to wake up. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was warm. Easy. As the afternoon sun softened, Emily said, "I think I came here to find a story. But maybe I just needed a place to breathe." Luke didn't know what to say to that, so he simply nodded. Sometimes silence said more than words. When they finally walked back toward town, she told him how she'd been traveling for months, moving from one place to another, chasing stories for a small magazine. She talked about long train rides, bus stations, and how sometimes she didn't know where she'd sleep next. She didn't say it like she wanted pity. She said it like someone who had learned to keep moving forward. He listened quietly. Every word she spoke painted a small picture in his mind, of a world far away from the ranch full of lights and strangers. A world he had once dreamed of but never touched. Before she left to return to her small motel for the night, she turned to him and said, "Luke, I'm glad we met." He didn't know how to respond to words like that, but the simple truth was, so was he. As she walked away, Luke stood there, hands on the fence, watching the fading sun paint the sky orange and pink. The same sunset he'd seen hundreds of times before, but somehow this one felt different. It felt alive. For years, his life had been like a river that never changed direction. But now he felt a small ripple in the water, gentle but clear. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. Emily's presence had already left a mark. And for a man like Luke, who had spent so many years living inside silence, that was something rare. As the night began to fall and the stars started to appear, Luke rode Rusty back to the ranch. He could still hear her laugh in his mind, still see the warmth in her eyes. Something had started. He didn't have a name for it yet, but it was real, and he couldn't stop thinking about it. Luke had always liked the quiet more than the noise. The wide open land, the warm wind, the sound of crickets at night, these were the things that made him feel safe. He lived on a small ranch just outside a rodeo town in Texas. His life was simple and slow, like the steady steps of a horse walking across dry land. Every morning before the sun came up, Luke woke up to the smell of coffee, the sound of roosters, and the soft movements of the horses waiting to be fed. He was 27, but his eyes often looked older, not from sadness, but from a kind of stillness that comes from being alone for too long. He had grown up with the ranch. His father had worked the land and his grandfather before that. It wasn't a big ranch, but it was honest work. Luke knew every inch of it, the old wooden fence that leaned to one side, the tree near the barn that gave the best shade in summer, and the pond where the horses liked to drink at sunset. He loved these little details. They made him feel like he belonged somewhere, even if no one was there to remind him of it. Luke wasn't a man of many words. In town, when he went to buy supplies or talk to the folks at the rodeo, he kept his hat low and his answers short. People liked him, but they didn't really know him. Most of them just called him Cowboy Luke, a quiet man who rode well and worked hard. And that was true. But there was more to him that no one ever asked about. When he was a boy, Luke dreamed of traveling beyond the fences of the ranch. He used to sit on the porch and imagine seeing big cities, bright lights, and new faces. But dreams have a way of fading when life gets busy. After his father passed away, Luke stayed to take care of the land. Every sunrise and sunset turned into a quiet routine. Soon the dream of seeing the world became something he folded away in a corner of his heart. But deep inside, he still felt it. The small, quiet wish for something different. He didn't even know what it was exactly. Not fame, not money, just a feeling, something that would make his heart beat a little faster than usual. He never said it out loud, not even to himself. He just carried it like an invisible shadow. The rodeo was coming to town that summer. Every year, cowboys and visitors from faraway places came to see the events. For Luke, it wasn't anything special anymore. He had been part of it so many times. But there was always something magical about rodeo nights. The air smelled like dust and sweet popcorn. The lights made the sky glow, and the sound of laughter floated around like music. On the day before the rodeo started, Luke spent the afternoon fixing the gate near the barn. The sun was strong, painting everything gold. His horse Rusty stood nearby, watching him with calm eyes. Rusty was his closest friend, the only one who had seen every side of him, the tired, the strong, and the silent. Luke patted Rusty's neck, smiled a little, and whispered, "We've got another rodeo coming, old boy." After work, Luke sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee. The sky was soft orange and pink. In the distance, the town was starting to get louder. Trucks were coming in, tents were going up. Music was playing near the main street. He could almost feel the energy, like the wind carried excitement to him. He didn't know it yet, but that night was the beginning of something different. It was the night when the quiet world he had built around himself would shake a little. That evening, some of the cowboys and townspeople gathered near a campfire not too far from the rodeo grounds. It was something they did every year, singing songs, telling stories, sharing warm drinks. Luke wasn't someone who liked crowds, but he went anyway. He liked sitting near the fire, not talking too much, just listening. It made him feel part of something without needing to change who he was. As he arrived, he nodded to a few familiar faces. The fire cracked softly. People laughed. Someone passed around a guitar. A few kids chased each other near the fence. It was simple, but it was warm. Luke found a quiet spot a little away from the center and sat on a log. He leaned forward, hat low, hands together, staring at the flames. And then she appeared. Emily. No one at the fire had ever seen her before. She walked in with a confident but kind step, wearing a faded denim jacket and carrying a small camera around her neck. Her hair was loose and moved gently in the wind. There was something about her that didn't quite fit the usual rodeo crowd. Not in a bad way, just in a way that made people look twice. She was from the city. A journalist, as Luke would later learn, traveling through small towns to collect real stories. Not the kind that end up in big newspapers with fancy headlines, but the kind that live quietly in people's hearts. She wanted to talk to people who had seen sunsets, rode horses, built their lives with their own hands. When she reached the fire, she didn't hesitate or look nervous. She smiled, a soft, bright smile that made the place feel lighter. People welcomed her, curious and friendly. She sat down near the fire, introduced herself, and began asking people about their lives. She didn't talk like most outsiders. She didn't rush people. She listened, really listened. That was rare. Luke didn't speak at first. He just watched her from where he sat quietly. She asked the old rodeo man about his first championship. She asked a young girl why she loved horses. She asked a mother what made this town feel like home. Her questions weren't big, but they opened people's hearts like warm hands. Luke didn't know why he couldn't look away. Maybe it was the way she seemed to belong, even though she was new. Maybe it was the way she looked at people, as if every story mattered. Or maybe it was because deep inside, something in her reminded him of the dream he had once hidden away. Emily's eyes met his across the fire. She didn't look away. She gave him the same warm smile she had given everyone else, but it felt different. It felt like she could see the quiet inside him, and wasn't afraid of it. She stood up after a few minutes and walked toward him. She didn't ask for permission to sit. She just sat down on the same log a few inches away, keeping a polite space. The firelight touched her face softly. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The world around them grew quieter, like the wind itself was holding its breath. "You're quiet," she said finally with a gentle laugh. "I like quiet people. They usually have the best stories." Luke didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to strangers sitting next to him, especially not someone like her, but her voice was calm like soft rain. He cleared his throat and answered, "I don't have any stories." She tilted her head, studying him for a moment. "I don't believe that. Everyone has at least one." He didn't smile, but something inside him softened a little. He didn't feel the need to push her away. So, he stayed. They sat there for a long time, not talking too much. She asked small, simple questions. He gave short, honest answers. She didn't try to fill every silence, and that made the silence feel easy. Luke noticed how her laugh was light, how her eyes shined when someone else spoke, and how she seemed to love listening more than talking. It had been years since someone made Luke feel seen without asking him to be someone else. He didn't know what this feeling was exactly, but it felt warm, like sitting near a fire on a cold night. As the night grew darker, the crowd around the fire got smaller. Some people left, some grew sleepy. The stars above the campfire spread across the sky like tiny lanterns. Emily wrapped her arms around her knees and looked up at them. "It's so quiet here," she whispered. "I've never heard quiet like this before." Luke followed her gaze. "You get used to it." She turned to him with a soft smile. "Or maybe you just learn to love it." He didn't answer, but her words stayed with him. For years, Luke had built walls around his heart, made of silence and distance. And here, beside a campfire, with a stranger who smiled like the stars belonged to everyone, a small crack appeared in that wall. He didn't fight it. He didn't even notice it fully. But it was there. The night didn't end with fireworks or big confessions. It ended quietly, the same way it had begun. But something had changed. Not in the world, but inside Luke. As he rode Rusty home under the soft moonlight, the sound of Emily's laugh played in his mind. For the first time in a long time, he didn't mind the quiet. It didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt full, like the beginning of something he didn't have a name for yet. and that was enough.